On a stormy night, deep in the heart of a dense forest, a lone cabin stood shrouded in darkness. It had been abandoned for years, but tonight, a faint light flickered within. Amelia, a thrill-seeker and urban explorer, had heard tales of the cabin's sinister history but couldn't resist the urge to investigate. As she approached, the wind howled through the trees, and the rain lashed against the wooden walls. The door creaked open with a gentle push, revealing an interior frozen in time. Cobwebs hung like curtains, and dust danced in the air. Amelia's flashlight cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. She stepped inside, her heart pounding. The story spoke of a family that had once lived there, disappearing without a trace. Some said they had been victims of a dark ritual, others claimed they had simply vanished into thin air. Amelia brushed off the tales as mere folklore, but as she moved deeper into the cabin, an unsettling feeling crept over her. In the living room, an old gramophone sat silently on a table. She reached out and turned it on, curious to hear if it still worked. To her surprise, it began to play a haunting melody. The music echoed through the cabin, almost drowning out the storm outside. She shivered, feeling an inexplicable chill. Suddenly, she heard whispers, soft at first, then growing louder. She swung her flashlight round but saw nothing. The whispers became more distinct, a chorus of voices murmuring in an ancient, forgotten language. Panic surged through her as she realized the voices were coming from the walls themselves. Desperate to leave, Amelia turned toward the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. Her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for her phone, using its weak light to navigate. As she moved, she felt a presence behind her, cold and malevolent. She turned slowly, and in the dim light, she saw them, the ghostly figures of the missing family, their eyes hollow and their faces twisted in eternal torment. They reached out to her, their fingers like icy tendrils. Amelia screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the cabin. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the forest was eerily quiet. Hikers found the cabin, its door wide open. Inside, there was no sign of Amelia, only her flashlight, lying on the floor, and the gramophone, still playing its haunting tune. The legend of the cabin grew that day, another name added to the list of those who had disappeared within its walls, never to be seen again. In the quaint, forgotten village of Blackwood, there stood a decrepit mansion known as Willow House. The locals avoided it, claiming it was cursed. The house had stood empty for decades, its windows dark, its doors perpetually closed. Stories of eerie lights, disembodied whispers, and ghostly apparitions kept even the bravest at bay. One autumn, a young couple, Emily and Mark, decided to move into Willow House. They had heard the rumors but dismissed them as superstitions. The house was a bargain, and they were eager to restore it to its former glory. On their first night, as they settled in, they heard faint footsteps echoing through the halls. Mark reassured Emily it was just the old house settling, but a chill ran down their spines. Days turned into weeks, and the eerie occurrences escalated. Doors creaked open on their own, shadows flickered in the corners of their vision, and cold spots appeared in random parts of the house. Emily began to have vivid nightmares of a woman in white, her face twisted in anguish, wandering the halls. Each night, the dreams grew more intense, leaving Emily feeling drained and terrified. One night, as a storm raged outside, Emily woke to find herself alone in bed. Mark was missing. Panicked, she searched the house, her heart pounding. She found him in the basement, standing before an old, ornate mirror. His eyes were vacant, his face blank. Emily called his name, but he remained unresponsive, staring into the mirror. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared in the mirror. It was the woman from Emily's dreams. She reached out, her fingers pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. Mark began to speak in a voice not his own, recounting the tragic tale of the woman in white, Eleanor, who had been murdered by her jealous husband in that very house. Her spirit, unable to find peace, was trapped within the mirror. Desperate to save Mark, Emily remembered an old journal she had found in the attic, written by the mansion's original owner. It detailed a ritual to release a trapped spirit. She quickly gathered the required items: a candle, a locket, and a piece of willow wood, and began the ritual, her hands trembling. As she chanted the incantation, the temperature dropped, and the room filled with an oppressive darkness. The figure in the mirror screamed, a sound that reverberated through Emily's very soul. The mirror shattered, and a gust of icy wind knocked Emily to the ground. When she opened her eyes, Mark was beside her, dazed but alive. The oppressive presence was gone, and the house felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. They left Willow House the next day, never to return. The mansion remains abandoned, a silent sentinel over the village of Blackwood, its haunted past now just a whisper on the wind. But some nights, When the moon is full and the air is still, the villagers swear they can hear the anguished cry of Eleanor, still searching for peace, forever haunting Willow House. In the quiet town of Eldridge, an old house sat on the edge of the forest, shrouded in darkness and mystery. The locals called it the Shadow House, a place that children dared each other to approach but never enter. Its history was marred with tales of disappearances and eerie noises that kept even the bravest at bay. One foggy autumn evening, Emma, a curious and adventurous journalist, arrived in Eldridge. She had heard the stories of the Shadow House and was determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and her notebook, she made her way to the dilapidated structure. The air grew colder as Emma approached the house. The wooden gate creaked open, as if inviting her inside. She took a deep breath and stepped through, feeling a chill run down her spine. The front door was ajar, revealing a dark hallway lined with old portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Emma's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She snapped a few photos, her camera capturing the unsettling ambience of the place. As she moved deeper into the house, she heard faint whispers, too soft to make out but persistent enough to send shivers through her. In the living room, she found an old diary lying on a dusty table. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the writing was still legible. It belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the house decades ago. Margaret wrote about strange occurrences, whispers in the night, objects moving on their own, and the feeling of being watched. Emma's heart pounded as she read the final entry. Margaret spoke of a presence, an unseen entity that had driven her to the brink of madness. She wrote of her plan to escape, but the diary ended abruptly, leaving Emma to wonder if Margaret had ever made it out. As Emma closed the diary, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She could almost make out the words, but they were in a language she didn't understand. The temperature dropped further, and she saw her breath mist in the air. Shadows seemed to move on their own, converging towards her. Panic set in. Emma turned to leave, but the way back was shrouded in darkness. The shadows pressed closer, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. In the chaos, she tripped and fell, her flashlight rolling away and plunging her into complete darkness. Scrambling to her feet, Emma felt a cold hand grasp her ankle. She screamed, kicking wildly, but the grip tightened, pulling her towards the shadows. Her vision blurred, and the last thing she saw was the ghostly figure of a woman, her eyes filled with sorrow and fear. The next morning, the townspeople found Emma's car abandoned outside the Shadow House. They searched for her but found no trace. Just like those before her, the legend of the Shadow House grew,